The Devil's Backbone Highway runs dead straight for 11 miles through the Texas Hill Country, flat and black under a sky with no light pollution for 50 miles in any direction. No wind out there most nights. Just heat shimmer rising off asphalt that never fully cools, even at 3 in the morning, the kind of heat you can still feel through the soles of your boots if you stand on the shoulder too long. I've worked the overnight shift at that booth for going on 5 months now, and there are still nights when the silence out there gets so complete I can hear my own pulse in my ears, like the whole hill country is holding its breath along with me. That's when I first saw them. 2 sets of headlights, one coming from the north, one from the south, perfectly synced like someone had timed them with a stopwatch and set them rolling at the exact same second. I watched them for a long while before I let myself believe what I was seeing. They grow brighter the way headlights do when a car's still 4 or 5 miles out, a soft white smear against the dark that gets sharper as the distance closes. I waited for the engine sound to catch up to the light, the low highway hum that always arrives a few seconds behind the glow. It never came. The lights just hung there, exactly the same distance away, neither one gaining a foot on the other, for almost 6 minutes by the clock on the booth wall. Then they went dark, both at once, like someone had thrown a switch somewhere out in that hill country dark, and the highway went back to being nothing but scrub brush and starlight. I told myself it was a heat mirage. I'd been working nights for 3 weeks by then, and exhaustion does strange things to a man's eyes after enough hours of staring at the same stretch of asphalt. I wanted to believe that explanation more than I'd ever wanted to believe anything in my life, because the alternative meant admitting that something about that road wasn't built the way roads are supposed to be built. My name's Wyatt Coulson, and 5 months ago I was working an oil rig outside Midland, 12 years in, decent money, a crew I'd known long enough to trust with my life on a good day. Then the company restructured, the way companies do when oil prices dip and somebody upstairs decides the forehands are the easiest weight to cut. And I was one of the names on a list that got handed out on a Friday afternoon with 2 weeks severance and a handshake nobody meant. My wife Renee filed for divorce 3 weeks after that. She told me the layoff wasn't the reason. Said things between us had been wrong for longer than I wanted to admit. And maybe she was right, but I know the timing of things, and I know what it looks like when 2 bad pieces of news land on top of each other and leave a man standing in an empty apartment wondering what exactly he did wrong. I moved into a 1-bedroom outside San Marcos with whatever fit in the bed of my truck, and I spent the better part of a month looking for anything that paid enough to keep the lights on without putting me back underground or back on a rig where the next round of cuts might find me again. I checked the state employment board most mornings out of habit more than hope, scrolling through warehouse jobs and call centers and the occasional construction gig that wanted certifications I didn't have. The posting for the toll booth was plain as anything, almost boring in how little it gave away. Toll operator, Devil's Backbone Tollway, remote posting, night differential pay, immediate start, no experience necessary. I sat with that listing open on my phone for a good 10 minutes before I called, partly because the pay was almost double what I'd expect for a booth job, and partly because I genuinely could not place a toll road on that stretch of highway. I'd grown up 20 minutes from there, in Comal County, and as far as I'd ever known, the Devil's Backbone Highway was free road, same as every other 2-lane blacktop cutting through that part of the hill country. I figured maybe the county had put in a new tollway recently, something I'd missed while I was 300 miles away working rigs. The interview lasted 4 minutes, maybe 5. A woman named Sandra, speaking for the County Transportation Authority, asked if I had a valid license, asked if I had any problem working alone for long stretches, asked if I had reliable transportation to get to a remote site. That was the whole interview. "Start Monday," she said. "Someone will meet you at the booth to walk you through everything. No mention of training videos, no mention of a handbook, nothing that would have told me what I was actually walking into." The booth itself sat at mile marker 5, a squat little structure with a single window, paint peeling in long curls off the wood siding, and a gate arm that looked decades older than the rest of the equipment around it, rust creeping up from the hinge like it had been raining on that one spot for years, even though it hadn't rained out there in a month. There was nothing else around it. No gas station, no rest stop, not even a billboard. Just scrub brush, a sagging barbed wire fence line, and the highway running off into nothing in both directions, disappearing into heat haze long before it reached any horizon a man could name. The man waiting for me there introduced himself as Earl, 60-some years old at least, maybe closer to 70, with the kind of tired stamped into his face that doesn't come from one bad night of sleep, but from years of them stacked on top of each other, until exhaustion becomes just another part of a man's features, like a scar that never quite heals over. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He didn't really look at me either, not directly, not the way most men do when they're sizing up whoever's about to take over their job. His eyes kept drifting just past my shoulder, toward the highway behind me, like he was keeping half his attention on the road even while he talked. "You're replacing me," he said. Not a question. Just a fact he was stating to confirm it out loud to himself as much as to me. I told him I guessed I was, and asked how long he'd been working the booth, mostly to fill the silence that followed, because something about the way he'd said it made the air feel heavier than it should have for a simple toll job introduction. "Long enough," he said, and left it sitting there without another word, like the answer was supposed to satisfy me, and he had no intention of saying more. He walked me through the basics fast after that, almost rushed, the register, the gate controls, a little space heater tucked under the counter that didn't work even when I jiggled the cord the way he showed me. He moved like a man checking items off a list he badly wanted finished. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a binder, 3 rings, the cover gone soft and curled at the corners from years of handling, and set it down on the counter between us, with a weight to the motion that didn't match how thin the thing actually was. "There's 7 rules," he said. "You follow them exact, every single night, no exceptions, no matter how tired you get or how long it's been since anything strange happened." I know how that sounds coming from a stranger on your first night. I thought the same thing once, sitting right about where you're standing now. He didn't open the binder. He didn't need to. He recited the rules from memory, the way a man recites something he's said so many times. The words have worn a groove into his thinking, smooth and automatic, no hesitation between one rule and the next. Rule 1. You collect a toll from every single vehicle that comes through this gate. No exceptions. You hear me. Doesn't matter if it's a trucker running late. Doesn't matter if it's a sheriff's deputy flashing his badge and telling you it's official business. Doesn't matter if the driver looks like they're in some kind of hurry or distress. Everybody pays, every single time. Rule 2. You do not leave this booth between midnight and 4 in the morning. Not for anything. Not if you hear something moving around outside in the brush. Not if you think you see somebody walking along the shoulder. You stay inside, door shut, and you wait it out. Rule 3. If a car comes through with a plate that doesn't match any state format you recognize, you write the number down in the log just the way it appears, and then you keep your mouth shut about it. Don't ask the driver what state issued it. Don't comment on it. Don't even let your face show that you noticed. Just write it down and let them pass through. Rule 4. You never check your rearview mirror. Not the booth's mirror, not your truck's mirror, between mile markers 4 and 6. Not driving in for your shift, not driving out after. You keep your eyes on the road ahead of you the whole stretch. Rule 5. He nodded toward an old beige landline phone bolted crooked to the wall, the kind of phone I hadn't seen outside a thrift store display in 15 years. If that rings and the caller ID comes up blank, you let it ring all the way out. You do not pick it up, not even to see who hangs up first. Rule 6. If you ever see headlights coming from both directions at the exact same time, matched up like they're moving on the same clock, you do not flash your own lights at them. Not a warning flash, not a greeting, nothing. You let them pass through on their own, however long that takes. Rule 7. He paused on this one longer than any of the others, his jaw working like he was deciding how much of it he actually wanted to say out loud. If you ever see my name come up on a delivery manifest, or God forbid on a paycheck stub, after tonight, you don't mention it. Not to me if you happen to run into me somewhere. Not to anybody at the county office. Not to the next fellow who takes this booth after you. You just let it go. I asked him what that last one meant, because it was the only rule that didn't sound like simple caution, the only one that sounded like it was hiding something underneath it. For the first time since he'd arrived, he actually looked at me head-on, eye to eye, like he was weighing something about my face, deciding whether I was the kind of man who'd last or the kind who wouldn't. "You'll understand eventually," he said, "or you won't be here long enough to need to." He laughed without another word after that, didn't say goodbye, didn't wish me luck, just walked to an old Chevy parked behind the booth and drove north, taillights shrinking smaller and smaller against the dark until the rise in the road swallowed them whole. I stood there alone with that binder in my hands and the broken space heater ticking uselessly against the cold, and I thought, not for the first time since the layoff, that I might have made a mistake taking this job. But rent doesn't care about a man's nerves, and I had 3 weeks left before my next payment was due, so I sat down on the stool behind the counter and waited for my first car. Before I keep going, I want to mention something for those of you who've been asking. A lot of you have requested stories without the strange rules format, So I started a second channel just for that, called Mr. Grimm Archives. Links down in the description if that's more your speed. Also, if there's a particular state or location you'd like a story set in, drop it in the comments below, because I read through every single one of them when I'm picking what to write next. Alright, back to the booth. The first 2 weeks passed quieter than I expected. Quiet in a way that started to feel less like peace the longer it stretched, and more like something holding itself back. Maybe 4 cars a night came through, sometimes fewer, mostly long-haul truckers grumbling about a toll booth showing up on a stretch of highway that used to run free, paying without much fuss once I explained the county had apparently put it in recently. I followed every rule those first 2 weeks, with the kind of careful attention you give new safety procedures on a rig you don't trust yet, checking the mirror exactly the way Earl said not to check it, except I followed that part too, eyes locked forward through markers 4 and 6 every single drive. But 2 weeks of nothing wears down caution, the same way water wears down stone, slow enough that you don't notice it happening until you look back and realize how much has eroded. I started slipping out of the booth around 1 in the morning just to stretch my legs for a minute, telling myself Rule 2 was probably some old liability concern, insurance language Earl had taken more seriously than the county ever intended. I let my rear-view habit go slack between the markers, telling myself nothing had ever come of checking it those first 2 weeks anyway. The binder sat under the counter, closed, mostly forgotten except for the 7 rules themselves, which I still ran through in my head most nights out of something between habit and superstition. It was the 9th night, or close to it, when the first car came through that wasn't supposed to stop. An old sedan, maybe a Buick. The paint faded down to a color I couldn't quite name under the booth's weak overhead light, somewhere between gray and a color that used to be blue a long time ago. The driver slowed at first the way every other car slowed, like he meant to roll down his window and pay, same as anyone, and then sped up hard at the last possible second, one hand coming up out of the window in a wave, his mouth moving fast like he was saying something I couldn't hear through the glass and the engine noise, and the 11 miles of nothing pressing in around us. I was exhausted that night, having worked a double shift the day before at a part-time stocking job I'd picked up to cover the gap between paychecks, and I waved back without thinking. The automatic kind of wave you give somebody you assume you'll never see again in your life. The gate arm stayed down where it was supposed to stop him. He drove straight through it without even slowing, like the arm wasn't there at all, like it was nothing more than a shadow painted across the road, and kept going north until his taillights vanished into the dark, same as Earl's had that first night. I logged it as equipment failure, wrote in the report that the gate sensor must have misfired, made a note to call maintenance first thing the next morning before I clocked out. I didn't think about Rule 1 again that night, too tired to connect what I'd just done to the rule Earl had recited with such weight behind it. The next night, the same car came through at almost the exact same minute, same faded paint, same driver leaning halfway out the window with that same frozen half-second wave, his mouth working through the same silent words. The gate didn't even register his approach this time. No warning chime. Nothing. I tested the sensor myself before my shift even started the following evening, and it worked perfectly fine on every other vehicle that came through after that, trucks and sedans, and one motorcycle that rattled the whole booth when it idled. Just not on him. He came back the night after that too, and the night after that, and the one after that, always within a minute or two of the same time, always the same wave, the same mouth shaping the same silent words. I never got close enough to read off his lips, like a loop of film stuck playing the same 4 seconds over and over, without ever advancing to whatever came next. Somewhere around then I started writing his plate number down in the log, even though it matched no state format I recognized. 3 letters followed by characters that weren't quite numbers, symbols I couldn't find on any keyboard I'd ever used. I knew writing it down without comment was breaking Rule 3 in spirit even if not in the letter of it, because some part of me kept turning the number over and over in my head trying to make sense of it, which felt like exactly the kind of attention Earl had warned me against giving it. I thought more than once about calling the county office and asking somebody what the symbols meant. I never did. I just kept writing the same impossible plate into the log, night after night, and telling myself that counted as following the rule close enough. About 3 weeks in, the phone rang for the first time since Earl left. Almost 2:30 in the morning, the booth dead silent otherwise. No traffic in either direction for the better part of an hour. The caller ID came up blank, exactly the way Earl said it might. My hand actually moved toward the receiver before I caught myself and remembered Rule 5, and I sat there with my fingers an inch from the phone while it rang and rang, counting the rings without meaning to, fighting the part of my brain that wanted very badly to know who was calling a toll booth in the middle of nowhere at that hour. It rang for what felt like a very long time before it finally stopped, and out of some compulsion I couldn't fully explain to myself, I checked the clock the second it went silent. Then later that week, off shift, I drove the 4 miles between markers 4 and 6 at a normal speed just to time it. The drive took almost the exact same length of time the phone had rung. I told myself that was a coincidence. I didn't fully believe myself even as I said it. I found the manifest about a month into the job. A maintenance crew dropped off supplies in a metal box outside the booth, the way they did every couple of weeks. Paper towels, coffee filters, the occasional replacement part for the gate mechanism. Except this time, there was a delivery slip clipped to the top of the stack that hadn't been there before. Earl's name was printed clean across the top of it, dated for a delivery scheduled 2 nights from when I found it, like the county still had him listed as an active employee at a booth he hadn't worked in over a month. I thought hard about Rule 7 sitting there with that slip in my hands. I thought about calling Sandra at the transportation office and asking her straight out whether Earl still worked there, whether there'd been some kind of clerical mix-up. Anything that might give me an ordinary explanation to hold on to. I didn't call anyone. I folded the slip and put it in my shirt pocket and went back to watching the highway through the booth's one window, and something in my chest had gone tight in a way that didn't loosen for the rest of that shift. The night everything came apart started out about as normal as any other. Slow traffic for the first few hours, 2 truckers heading opposite directions who both paid without comment, 1 motorcycle rider who handed over cash and rode off without a word. Around 3:40 in the morning, I saw them. Headlights coming from both directions at once, north and south, matched up exact, down to the second. The same thing I'd seen on my very first night. The thing I'd spent 5 months convincing myself had only been a trick of heat and exhaustion playing games with my eyes. This time I didn't reach for that explanation. This time my hand found the headlight switch on the booth's little control panel before I'd even consciously decided to move it. Some old reflex built up from years of night driving on empty roads back when I still drove the rigs. The kind where you flash your high beams at an oncoming car out of pure habit. A warning, a greeting, an acknowledgement that you've seen each other out here in all this dark. I caught myself half a second before my finger actually pressed the switch. Rule 6 surfacing fast and sharp in my mind. Do not flash your own lights at them. And I sat there frozen with my hand hovering over the panel, fighting against 5 months of instinct telling me to do the one thing Earl had warned me never to do. That's when I heard something move just behind the booth, a scrape of gravel under weight, footsteps maybe, close enough that every single one of Earl's 7 rules lit up in my head at once like a string of warning lights flipping on in sequence. Rule 2 said stay inside no matter what I heard outside. I stayed, locked in place on that stool, but my whole body had started shaking in a way I couldn't control. Some animal part of my brain screaming that I needed to see what was making that sound, needed to know how close it had gotten. And in that fear, in that shaking, I did the one thing I'd managed not to do in 5 months on that job. I checked the rearview mirror mounted on the booth's outer wall. We were between markers 4 and 6. I didn't need to check the road signs to know that. I'd come to know exactly where I stood on that stretch every single night, whether I wanted to track it or not. The knowledge sitting permanently in the back of my mind like a second clock running alongside the real one. In the mirror, I saw the road behind the booth at first, empty asphalt running south into the dark, same as it always looked, for maybe half a second of relief before everything changed. Then the faded sedan was there, parked not 50 feet back from the booth, headlights dark, engine still running low and steady. The driver wasn't waving this time. He sat there, looking straight at the booth, straight at me through 2 mirrors and however many feet of Texas Hill Country dark separated us, with an expression on his face I can only describe as relief, the kind of relief you'd see on somebody who'd been waiting a very long time for somebody to finally look back at them. In the passenger seat beside him, lit faint and gray by the dashboard glow, sat Earl. I don't know exactly how long I stayed frozen like that, staring into that mirror at a man who should have been 300 miles away by now, and the old employee whose taillights I'd watched disappear over a rise 5 months earlier. Long enough, at least, for the headlights from both directions to finally close the last of their distance and sweep through the booth, 2 beams crossing the walls and gone, leaving nothing behind but the hum of that broken space heater and the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged in the sudden quiet. When I made myself look back into the mirror, the sedan was gone. No taillights receding into the distance the way a car leaving normally would look. No sound of an engine fading out down the highway. Just empty road again, same as it always looks. The second you stop watching it closely enough to notice what it's actually doing. I didn't call the county that night. I thought hard about quitting more than once before the sun came up, sitting there replaying everything Earl had told me on my first night, every word of every rule running through my head on a loop of its own. I went back the next shift anyway, and the one after that, because somewhere across those 5 months I'd started to understand something Earl never said outright but clearly carried with him every single day he worked that booth. That sedan has been running this stretch of highway longer than any single operator's lasted in that booth. The headlights coming from both directions every so often aren't two separate cars passing each other on a quiet road. They're the same car, somehow, moving both ways at once on a loop that started running long before I ever applied for this job and won't stop just because I decide to walk away from it. The toll I waved through that very first week never actually left the road. It just kept circling, 4 miles out, then closer, then close enough eventually to look back at me through a mirror. I was never supposed to check in the first place. I think about Earl more than I probably should. Wonder whether he was really sitting in that passenger seat or whether I imagined the whole thing out of exhaustion and fear stacked up over too many sleepless nights. I wonder what years of nights like that do to a man's eyes. What they do to the rest of him too, by the time he finally hands the binder off to somebody else. I think about quitting almost every week that passes, but I keep landing on the same thought that's kept me parked behind that register every single night since. The thought that won't let me walk away clean. Somebody has to be the one watching this stretch of road. Somebody has to collect the toll, follow all 7 rules exactly the way they're written, keep whatever's looping out there contained to its 4 miles instead of letting it wander further than that, into town, onto roads where people aren't paying close enough attention to notice headlights that never quite arrive. I don't know if quitting would end any of it. I think it would only mean somebody else takes my place behind that window eventually. Somebody who doesn't know yet not to check the mirror. Somebody who'll learn the way I did, alone, at 3:40 in the morning, with 2 sets of headlights closing in from both directions at once, and a man in the passenger seat who used to sit right where I'm sitting now. So I stay. I follow the rules, every one of them, every single night. And some nights, when the highway runs quiet and the heat shimmer rises off that dead straight asphalt the way it always has, I find myself watching the horizon in both directions at the same time, waiting to see whose turn it'll be to drive through tonight.